Marcus Williams had always said that art was the only language that couldn't lie. On a humid August morning in 2005, those words echoed through his empty studio in Detroit's Corktown district, where paint tubes lay scattered across a wooden table like abandoned promises. His landlord, Mrs. Chen, found the door unlocked and a coffee still warm in a chipped mug that read "World's Greatest Dad," a Father's Day gift from his 8-year-old daughter Zara. The unfinished canvas on his easel showed the beginning of what might have been his masterpiece, a young girl's silhouette against a backdrop of golden light, her arms stretched toward something just beyond the frame. The paint was still wet. If this story of a father's love expressed through art touches something deep within you, share it with someone who understands that creativity often carries the weight of our deepest hopes and fears. Marcus had been 34 then, a self-taught artist whose work captured the quiet dignity of everyday black life in Detroit. His paintings didn't scream for attention, they whispered truths about barbershop conversations, Sunday morning church services, and children playing in fire hydrant spray. Gallery owners had begun to notice. 3 of his pieces were scheduled for a group exhibition at the prestigious Whitmore Gallery that fall. But Marcus Williams never made it to his own opening night. His disappearance was as sudden as a blown fuse, leaving those who knew him grasping for explanations that never came. His daughter Zara, who lived with her mother in suburban Royal Oak, kept asking when Daddy was coming to take her to the zoo like he'd promised. His sister Denise filed missing person reports that seemed to vanish into the bureaucratic maze of an overworked police department. The last person to see Marcus was Jerome Martinez, the owner of the corner market where Marcus bought his daily coffee and lottery ticket. Jerome remembered the artist seemed distracted that morning, checking his phone repeatedly and glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone. When Jerome asked if everything was all right, Marcus had smiled. That same gentle smile that had charmed art enthusiasts at local coffee shop exhibitions, and said, "Everything's about to change, man. Everything." Within a week of his disappearance, someone broke into Marcus's studio. They took his finished paintings, but left behind his brushes, his easel, and dozens of sketches that had been tucked away in a weathered leather portfolio. The police assumed it was a burglary gone wrong, though they couldn't explain why thieves would steal art but leave behind expensive equipment. Mrs. Chen, a 72-year-old immigrant who had rented to artists for decades, kept Marcus's remaining belongings in a storage room in her basement. She had seen too many dreamers come and go, but something about Marcus's sudden departure felt different, unfinished, like a sentence that ended mid-thought. The weeks stretched into months. The Whitmore Gallery quietly removed Marcus Williams from their upcoming exhibition roster. His name disappeared from local art blogs and community newsletters. Detroit, a city familiar with loss, absorbed one more absence into its narrative of departed souls. But Denise Williams refused to let her brother become another forgotten statistic. She visited police stations, hospitals, and homeless shelters. She posted flyers with Marcus's photo on telephone poles and community bulletin boards until rain and time weathered them into illegible scraps. She called every contact in Marcus's phone, every gallery he'd ever mentioned, every artist he'd ever shared a drink with at local bars. The trail always led nowhere. As winter arrived in Detroit, covering the city in snow that made everything look temporarily clean and hopeful, Denise sat in Marcus's empty studio one last time, before Mrs. Chen officially cleared it out. The unfinished painting still stood on the easel, the young girl's silhouette now seeming to reach not toward light, but into the growing shadows of unanswered questions. Denise touched the dried paint with her fingertip, feeling the texture of her brother's last creative moment. In that touch was everything Marcus had never gotten to say, every story he'd never gotten to tell, every promise to his daughter he'd never gotten to keep. The studio fell silent, except for the distant hum of traffic and the whistle of wind through a cracked window. Outside, Detroit continued its cycle of decline and renewal, forgetting and remembering, losing and finding. Inside, the ghost of Marcus Williams's final artistic vision waited in the darkness, patient as prayer, enduring as grief. By spring 2006, most people had stopped asking about Marcus Williams. Life moved forward, as it always does, leaving behind only the ache of absence and the stubborn hope of those who loved him that someday, somehow, they would understand what had happened to the gentle man who painted light into the shadows of ordinary days. The art world, with its short attention span and relentless pursuit of the next big thing, had already moved on. 18 months after Marcus Williams vanished, The Whitmore Gallery in downtown Detroit's Cultural District was preparing for its most ambitious exhibition in years. The gallery's stark white walls, illuminated by precisely angled track lighting, would soon display the work of David Harrington, a 38-year-old artist whose meteoric rise had captivated critics and collectors alike. Harrington's story read like an art world fairy tale. A former investment banker who had abandoned Wall Street to pursue his true calling, he'd emerged seemingly overnight with a distinctive style that captured urban African-American life with what critics called unprecedented authenticity and emotional depth. His paintings sold for tens of thousands of dollars, with waiting lists of collectors eager to own what the Detroit Free Press had dubbed windows into the soul of Black America. Gallery owner Victoria Whitmore, a woman whose silver hair and designer glasses suggested both sophistication and shrewd business sense, stood before three of Harrington's latest works. The paintings showed scenes that felt immediately familiar to anyone who had lived in Detroit. An elderly man playing chess in Hart Plaza, children dancing in the spray of an open fire hydrant, a woman in Sunday clothes waiting for a bus as morning light filtered through the city's haze. David has this remarkable ability to find the sacred in the everyday, Victoria explained to a small group of art journalists during a preview tour. His work doesn't just depict Black life, it honors it. There's a tenderness in these pieces that speaks to universal human experiences while remaining deeply rooted in authentic cultural expression. The journalist nodded and scribbled notes. David Harrington himself stood nearby, tall and lean, in an expensive charcoal suit that suggested success without ostentation. His brown hair was perfectly styled, his smile practiced and warm. When asked about his inspiration, he spoke eloquently about growing up in diverse neighborhoods, about spending time in communities often overlooked by mainstream art. "I believe art has a responsibility to bear witness," Harrington said, his voice carrying the kind of gravity that impressed donors and critics. "These paintings aren't just images, they're testimonies to the dignity and beauty that exists in every corner of our city." What the journalist couldn't know, was that 6 of the 8 paintings in Harrington's upcoming exhibition had been created by Marcus Williams. The works had been carefully altered, signatures removed and replaced, minor details changed, color palettes subtly shifted, but the soul of each piece, the fundamental vision that gave them their power, belonged to the missing artist. The transformation had been meticulous. Harrington had studied Marcus's technique for months, learning to mimic his brushstrokes, his use of light, his way of capturing the weight of a subject's gaze. He'd practiced until he could replicate Marcus's style well enough to make the necessary modifications without destroying the painting's essential character. The theft hadn't been random. 3 weeks before Marcus disappeared, he'd met with Thomas Kellerman, a man who introduced himself as a private art dealer representing anonymous collectors. Kellerman was actually working for Harrington, scouting emerging artists whose work showed commercial potential, but who lacked the connections or business savvy to fully capitalize on their talent. Marcus had been perfect, gifted but naive, passionate but poor, desperate for recognition but trusting enough to believe that success would come through merit alone. When Kellerman expressed interest in Marcus's entire portfolio, offering to arrange exhibitions and sales, Marcus had been elated. Finally, someone who understood his vision. The meeting was supposed to take place on the morning Marcus disappeared. Kellerman had promised to bring contracts and an advance payment that would allow Marcus to quit his part-time job at a nearby auto parts store and focus entirely on his art. Marcus had even told his daughter about it during their last phone call, promising her that Daddy was about to become a famous artist, but Marcus never made it to that meeting. On his way to the downtown hotel where he was supposed to meet Kellerman, his phone had rung with a call that changed everything. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and terrifying in its certainty. If Marcus wanted to see his daughter safely grow up, he would disappear that very morning and never return to Detroit. The caller knew details about Zara's school schedule, her mother's work routine, the route she took to soccer practice. They knew about the broken lock on Marcus's ex-wife's back door, about the fact that she often forgot to set the house alarm. The message was clear. Marcus Williams could disappear voluntarily, or his daughter might disappear involuntarily. Marcus had driven straight to the Greyhound station downtown, buying a one-way ticket to Atlanta with cash he'd been saving for art supplies. He'd thrown his phone into the Detroit River from the Belle Isle Bridge, watching it disappear beneath the dark water, like a stone carrying all his dreams to the bottom. Meanwhile, Kellerman and Harrington's other associates had broken into his studio, taking the finished paintings and leaving behind evidence of a burglary. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus Williams would become a cautionary tale about the dangers of living in Detroit, while his artwork would be reborn under David Harrington's name. Victoria Whitmore was not part of the conspiracy, but she was complicit in a different way. She never asked too many questions about Harrington's sudden emergence as an artist, never investigated the sources of his inspiration too closely. The art world was full of late bloomers and career changers, and Harrington's work spoke for itself. His paintings sold well, attracted positive critical attention, and brought prestige to her gallery. The exhibition opening was scheduled for October 2007. Invitations had been mailed to collectors, critics, and Detroit's cultural elite. The paintings were being professionally photographed for the catalog. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. But in Atlanta, Marcus Williams was learning that disappearing was only the first part of staying gone. By 2007, Marcus Williams had been dead for nearly 2 years. At least, that's what his Social Security records indicated. The man who had once signed his paintings with confident flourishes now existed only as Michael Washington, a name chosen from a cemetery headstone in a moment of desperate creativity. He worked third shift at a warehouse in suburban Atlanta, loading trucks bound for destinations he'd never see. The work was mindless, which was both blessing and curse. His hands, once steady enough to capture the play of light across a child's face, now moved boxes from conveyor belts to waiting trucks. The repetitive motion gave him time to think, but thinking had become a dangerous luxury. Every memory of his daughter felt like touching a live wire. Every recollection of his sister's laugh or his mother's Sunday dinners carried the weight of permanent loss. Marcus rented a basement efficiency apartment in a neighborhood where no one asked questions about past lives or missing paperwork. His landlord, a woman named Constance who ran a small beauty salon upstairs, accepted cash and didn't require references. She assumed Michael Washington was running from something, an ex-wife, bad debts, or worse. But she learned that survival sometimes meant minding your own business. The apartment was furnished with the basics: a twin bed, a small table, 2 chairs that didn't match, and a hot plate that barely worked. Marcus had no television, no phone, no computer. His only connection to the world beyond Atlanta came from newspapers he found, abandoned on bus seats, and fragments of conversations overheard at the diner where he ate breakfast after his shifts ended. What haunted him most was not knowing if Zara was safe. The men who had threatened her, he'd never learned their names or their connection to the art world, had promised to leave her alone as long as he stayed gone. But promises from people who stole lives weren't worth much. Every day that passed without news was both relief and agony. Marcus had tried once to call his sister Denise from a payphone outside a gas station, but he'd hung up before the number finished dialing. His voice might be traced, recorded, analyzed. His location might be triangulated. Zara might pay the price for his moment of weakness. Instead, he wrote letters he never sent. On pages torn from notebooks bought at dollar stores, Marcus poured out explanations, apologies, and declarations of love that would never reach their intended recipients. The letters accumulated in a shoebox under his bed, becoming a paper graveyard of everything he couldn't say. "Dear Zara," one letter began, "Daddy didn't leave because he wanted to. Daddy left because staying would have put you in danger, and protecting you is more important than anything else in the world. Dear Denise, read another. I know you're looking for me. I know you won't stop until you understand what happened. Please stop looking. Please trust that I had no choice." His artwork lived only in these letters now. Marcus described paintings he would never create, exhibitions he would never have, conversations about art he would never share with his daughter. He wrote about the way Atlanta's morning light hit the warehouse loading dock, about the faces of his coworkers, about the rhythm of machinery and the stories told by tired hands. But he never picked up a brush, never bought paint or canvas, or even a simple sketch pad. Art had been the reason for his downfall, the thing that made him valuable enough to steal from, and dangerous enough to silence. Creating anything that might be traced back to his real identity felt like playing with fire in a room full of gasoline. The isolation was crushing. Marcus had been a social person, someone who made friends easily and found inspiration in conversation. Now he spoke to almost no one beyond the minimum required for work and basic transactions. He became expert at the kind of polite invisibility that made people forget they'd seen him 5 minutes after he walked away. Sometimes late at night when the warehouse was quiet and he was alone with pallets of merchandise bound for distant cities, Marcus would close his eyes and try to paint in his imagination. He would picture canvas and brushes, would feel the familiar weight of a palette in his left hand while his right hand moved across an invisible surface. These phantom paintings were his only remaining connection to the person he'd been. In these imaginary works, he painted Zara growing up without him. He painted her first day of high school, her graduation, her wedding day. He painted the conversations they would never have, the bedtime stories he would never read, the birthday cakes he would never help her blow out. Each invisible brushstroke was both an act of love and an acknowledgement of loss. The newspapers occasionally carried stories about Detroit's ongoing struggles and occasional triumphs. Marcus read about urban renewal projects, about artists receiving grants, about galleries closing and opening. Once he saw a small item about a missing person case that had been officially closed due to lack of evidence. The name was his own. Marcus Williams was now presumed dead, another casualty of a city where people sometimes vanished without explanation. There would be no more searches, no more investigations, no more hope of official discovery. He had become a ghost in the most literal sense. Alive but erased, present but invisible, breathing but not living. In his letters to Zara, he tried to explain what it meant to love someone so much that you would disappear to protect them. But the words felt inadequate, too small to contain the magnitude of what he'd sacrificed and why. How do you tell a child that her father chose to become no one so that she could safely be someone? The warehouse shifts ended at dawn, and Marcus would walk home through neighborhoods coming alive with morning routines. Children waited for school buses, parents headed to work, dogs were walked, and newspapers collected. He observed this ordinary choreography of daily life like an anthropologist, studying a culture he could never join. At home, he would add another letter to the shoebox, then try to sleep despite the sound of traffic, and the knowledge that somewhere in Detroit, his daughter was growing up believing her father had abandoned her rather than died trying to protect her. The truth, Marcus had learned, was often more painful than lies. David Harrington's career trajectory from 2007 to 2015 read like an art world success story written in bold strokes. The exhibition at Whitmore Gallery had sold out on opening night, with collectors fighting over paintings that seemed to capture something essential about American urban life. Art critics praised Harrington's intuitive understanding of community and his remarkable ability to find beauty in overlooked corners of society. By 2010, Harrington's work was being shown in galleries across the Midwest. Chicago's prestigious Millennium Art Center featured his paintings in a group exhibition titled New Voices in American Realism. The catalog essay, written by a prominent art historian, described Harrington as part of a generation of artists who were reclaiming narrative painting and restoring dignity to figurative art. The success brought everything Harrington had dreamed of but Marcus Williams had deserved. Gallery representation in multiple cities, features in art magazines, collectors who competed to acquire his work, invitations to speak at universities and arts organizations, a comfortable life funded by talent that wasn't entirely his own. Victoria Whitmore had become Harrington's primary dealer, organizing exhibitions that consistently sold well. She arranged studio visits with important collectors, facilitated sales to corporate clients, and helped build the mythology around Harrington's transformation from businessman to artist. The narrative was compelling. The successful professional who sacrificed financial security to pursue authentic artistic expression. David's work has this incredible emotional honesty, Victoria would tell potential buyers. When you look at his paintings, you're seeing through the eyes of someone who truly understands the communities he depicts. There's no artifice, no cultural tourism. This is the real thing. What made the deception so effective was that Harrington had become genuinely skilled at mimicking Marcus's style. He'd spent hundreds of hours studying the stolen paintings, learning not just technique, but the underlying sensibility that informed Marcus's artistic choices. He could now create original works that felt authentic to Marcus's vision while bearing Harrington's signature. The stolen paintings from Marcus's studio had been strategically released into the market over several years. Each piece was presented as part of Harrington's evolving body of work, with careful documentation of provenance and exhibition history. Gallery records showed a consistent progression of artistic development, with no suspicious gaps or sudden changes in style. But success carried its own anxieties. The higher Harrington's profile rose, the greater the risk of exposure became. Art world recognition brought scrutiny, and scrutiny invited questions that Harrington preferred to avoid. He developed strategies for deflecting inquiries about his early influences and training, steering conversations toward philosophy and social commentary rather than technical details about his artistic development. The most dangerous moments came during studio visits, when collectors or journalists wanted to see him work. Harrington had learned to stage these encounters carefully, always having a painting in progress that required only minor adjustments. He would make small changes to compositions while discussing his process, giving visitors the impression of witnessing authentic creative work. His actual studio, hidden in a warehouse space across town, contained the evidence of his true process: photocopies of Marcus's sketches, color studies based on the stolen paintings, and practice canvases where he'd perfected his mimicry of Marcus's brushwork. This space was secured with multiple locks and a security system that would alert him to any unauthorized entry. The psychological toll was constant but manageable. Harrington had convinced himself that he was honoring Marcus Williams by keeping his artistic vision alive. The stolen paintings were being seen by thousands of people who would never have discovered them otherwise. Museums were acquiring works that would be preserved for future generations. Marcus's art was having the impact it deserved, even if Marcus himself couldn't claim credit for it. This rationalization became easier as years passed, and the art world embraced David Harrington as an important contemporary voice. Reviews, awards, and academic attention created a kind of retroactive legitimacy. The work's quality justified its existence, regardless of its origin. By 2013, Harrington's paintings were selling for six figures. The Whitney Museum had acquired one of his pieces for their permanent collection, actually a Marcus Williams original that had been carefully altered and re-signed. Major collectors competed at auctions for works that combined artistic merit with investment potential. The transformation was complete. David Harrington had become a real artist in every way except the most important one. The work that made his reputation possible had been created by someone else. But in a culture that valued success over authenticity, that celebrated outcomes more than origins, the distinction sometimes felt academic. Harrington lived well, but not extravagantly, aware that too much visible wealth might attract unwanted attention to his background. He owned a comfortable house in Detroit's revitalized downtown district, drove a luxury car that suggested success without ostentation, and traveled to art fairs and exhibitions around the country. His personal life remained carefully compartmentalized. He dated occasionally but avoided serious relationships that might require too much honesty about his past. He had no close friends, only professional associates and social acquaintances. The persona of David Harrington was meticulously maintained but also profoundly lonely. Sometimes, late at night in his real studio, Harrington would stare at the photocopies of Marcus's original sketches and wonder what had happened to the man who created them. He'd convinced himself that Marcus Williams was probably dead. People didn't just disappear and stay gone unless something permanent had happened to them. This assumption helped with the guilt. Dead men didn't need recognition or royalties. Dead men couldn't reclaim stolen legacies or demand justice for artistic theft. Dead men were beyond harm, which meant continuing to profit from their work was a victimless crime. But David Harrington didn't know that Marcus Williams was very much alive, working night shifts in an Atlanta warehouse, and writing letters he would never send to a daughter who thought he'd abandoned her. And he didn't know that the art world's capacity for secrets was about to be tested by someone with no reason to protect either of them. Maya Chen had always believed that museums held the kind of truth that mattered most, not the dramatic revelations of detective novels, but the quiet discoveries that changed how you understood the world. As a graduate student in art history at Wayne State University, she'd chosen her summer internship at the Detroit Institute of Arts specifically because she wanted to work with American contemporary collections, particularly pieces that explored African American urban experiences. Maya was 24, the daughter of immigrants who'd built successful careers through methodical attention to detail and healthy skepticism about surface appearances. Her parents ran a small accounting firm in Detroit's suburbs, and they'd raised their daughter to ask questions that others might consider impolite. This tendency had served Maya well in academic settings, where professors appreciated students who dug deeper than required reading assignments. The discovery began on a humid Thursday in July 2023, when Maya was cataloging recent acquisitions in the museum's climate-controlled storage facility. The DIA had purchased several works from established dealers, including 2 paintings by David Harrington. Maya's supervisor, Dr. Janet Morrison, had assigned her the routine task of verifying provenance documentation and creating detailed condition reports for insurance purposes. Maya enjoyed this kind of work. There was something satisfying about the systematic process of examining artworks up close, noting details that casual observers might miss, and cross-referencing documentation to ensure accuracy. She'd always been the type of student who read footnotes and checked sources, the type who found discrepancies that professors had missed for years. The first Harrington painting was titled Sunday Morning Brush Park and depicted an elderly black man reading a newspaper on a front porch, morning light filtering through the leaves of an old maple tree. The composition was masterful, the brushwork confident, the emotional content immediately accessible yet subtly complex. Maya could understand why the museum's acquisition committee had been eager to add it to their collection. But something nagged at her as she examined the piece under high-intensity lighting. The signature in the bottom right corner looked different from other Harrington works she'd seen in exhibitions and catalogs. The brushwork in the signature area seemed to flow differently from the rest of the painting, as if it had been applied at a different time or with different materials. Maya made note of her observation, but didn't initially consider it significant. Artists' signatures evolved over time, and technical variations were common in works created years apart. She photographed the painting from multiple angles, documenting its condition and noting the subtle differences in paint texture that occurred throughout the composition. The second painting, Children Playing Hart Plaza, showed 3 young people running through the spray of a fountain, their laughter almost audible through the artist's skillful rendering of motion and light. Again, Maya was struck by the work's emotional authenticity and technical proficiency. Again, she noticed something odd about the signature. This time, Maya decided to investigate further. She pulled up the museum's digital archives and compared high-resolution images of both signatures to documented examples of Harrington's autograph from gallery catalogs and exhibition materials. The differences were subtle but consistent. The D in David was formed differently. The H in Harrington showed variations in the angle of its crossbar. Maya's next step was to research Harrington's exhibition history more thoroughly. She spent the afternoon in the museum's library, reviewing art magazines and exhibition catalogs from the past 15 years. What she found was impressive. Consistent critical praise, steady career advancement, and work that showed clear artistic development over time. But as Maya read more carefully, she began to notice gaps in the documentation. Early career information was sparse. References to Harrington's artistic training were vague. Interviews focused heavily on his philosophy and social commentary, while providing few specific details about his technical development or creative process. The inconsistencies might have remained academic curiosities if Maya hadn't decided to examine the paintings using the museum's advanced imaging technology. The DIA had recently acquired equipment capable of revealing layers of paint invisible to the naked eye, technology typically used to authenticate works and study artists' techniques. When Maya viewed Sunday Morning Brush Park under infrared imaging, she discovered something extraordinary. Beneath Harrington's signature was evidence of another signature, one that had been carefully painted over, but not completely obscured. The underlying signature was partially legible. M. Will. Maya's pulse quickened as she examined the second painting under the same technology. Again, evidence of an earlier signature appeared beneath Harrington's name. This one was more complete. M. Williams, 2004. The implications were staggering. Either David Harrington had systematically painted over someone else's signatures on his own work, which would be bizarre and pointless, or these paintings had originally been signed by someone else entirely. Someone named M. Williams, who had completed at least one of these works in 2004, years before Harrington claimed to have painted it. Maya spent the next week researching every M. Williams she could find in Detroit's art community. The search led her to a 2005 missing person report that had been filed by Denise Williams for her brother Marcus, described as a local artist whose disappearance had never been solved. The report included a photograph that made Maya's breath catch. Marcus Williams looked exactly like the kind of person who would create paintings like the ones attributed to Harrington. The photograph showed a man in his mid-30s, with thoughtful eyes and paint-stained fingers, standing in front of an easel in what appeared to be a modest studio. But it was the painting visible in the background of the photograph that convinced Maya she'd stumbled onto something significant. It was clearly an earlier version of one of Harrington's most famous works. Maya realized she was holding evidence of what appeared to be systematic art theft, the kind of crime that could destroy careers and reputations while raising questions about the integrity of the entire contemporary art market. She also realized she was probably in over her head. Dr. Morrison was in meetings all day, and Maya spent the afternoon pacing the museum's corridors, wondering how to present her findings without sounding like a conspiracy theorist. She'd always been careful about making accusations without solid proof, but the evidence was becoming harder to ignore. That evening, Maya called her parents and asked for advice about ethical dilemmas in professional settings. Without revealing specifics, she described a hypothetical situation where an intern discovered evidence of wrongdoing by an established professional. Should the intern report their suspicions immediately or gather more evidence first? Her father, with the practical wisdom of someone who'd built a business by avoiding unnecessary risks, advised caution. "Get all the facts first," he said. "Make sure you understand what you're dealing with before you accuse anyone of anything." Her mother, with the moral clarity of someone who'd immigrated to America believing in its promise of justice, had a different perspective. If you know something is wrong, you have to speak up. That's why they give you the tools to find the truth. Maya realized she needed both approaches, more evidence and the courage to act on it. The next morning, she would begin the process of determining whether Marcus Williams had been a victim of one of the art world's most audacious thefts, and whether David Harrington's celebrated career was built on another man's stolen dreams. The truth, she was learning, often hid in plain sight, waiting for someone with the right tools and the right questions to bring it into the light. The basement of the Detroit Institute of Arts contained more than just artwork and artifacts. It held the accumulated memory of a city's cultural history. Maya Chen had been given access to this repository of forgotten treasures as part of her internship, and she'd learned to navigate its maze of storage rooms and climate-controlled chambers like an archaeologist exploring a buried civilization. 3 days after discovering the hidden signatures, Maya was searching for additional evidence when she found something that changed everything. A leather portfolio, tucked behind a stack of unframed paintings in a section designated for works of, quote, uncertain provenance. The portfolio was weathered and worn, held together with a rubber band that had lost most of its elasticity. Inside were 37 sketches, all signed M. Williams in handwriting that matched the signature she discovered beneath Harrington's paintings. The sketches showed preparatory work for paintings she recognized immediately, not just the 2 in the DIA's collection, but several others that had been featured in Harrington exhibitions over the years. Maya's hands trembled as she photographed each sketch, documenting what appeared to be Marcus Williams's complete creative process for works that had made David Harrington famous. The sketches revealed the artist's mind at work. Initial compositions, revisions, studies of light and shadow, detailed drawings of hands and faces that would later appear in the finished paintings. But the most devastating discovery was a small notebook tucked into the portfolio's back pocket. The notebook contained dates, ideas for paintings, and personal reflections that provided an intimate glimpse into Marcus Williams's artistic vision and daily life. One entry, dated July 15, 2005, read, "Zara keeps asking when I'll paint her picture, maybe for her birthday next month. Want to show her dancing, the way she moves when she thinks no one is watching. Light from the west window, late afternoon. Joy should be painted in gold." Maya recognized this description immediately. One of Harrington's most celebrated paintings, titled Young Dancer, showed exactly such a scene. A young girl moving to unheard music, bathed in golden afternoon light. The painting had sold for $180,000 at auction in 2019. The notebook contained dozens of similar entries, each one corresponding to paintings that now hung in galleries and private collections under David Harrington's name. Maya was looking at the creative DNA of an entire body of work, the original artistic impulses that had been stolen along with the physical paintings. She also found something else, a business card tucked between the notebook's pages. Thomas Kellerman, private art consultant, with a phone number and email address. Maya had never heard of Kellerman, but his card's presence suggested he might have been Marcus Williams's last contact before disappearing. Maya spent her lunch break researching Thomas Kellerman online. What she found was troubling. Kellerman had been involved in several art deals over the years that had later been questioned by authorities. Nothing had been proven, but a pattern emerged of transactions where promising artists had sold work at below-market prices to buyers who remained anonymous. The more Maya investigated, the clearer the picture became. Marcus Williams had been targeted, his work stolen, and his identity erased so completely that his artistic legacy could be transferred to someone else. David Harrington hadn't just stolen paintings, he'd stolen an entire career. Maya knew she needed to approach Dr. Morrison with her findings, but she also realized the implications went far beyond the DIA's collection. If her suspicions were correct, dozens of paintings in galleries and private collections were actually the work of a missing man whose family had spent 18 years wondering what happened to him. That afternoon, Maya requested a meeting with Dr. Morrison. She prepared carefully, organizing her evidence into a clear narrative that would be difficult to dismiss. The hidden signatures, revealed by infrared imaging, the sketches and notebook found in museum storage, the suspicious gaps in Harrington's documented artistic development. Each piece of evidence supported the others in a pattern too consistent to ignore. Dr. Morrison listened with the kind of careful attention that Maya had learned to recognize in experienced professionals who understood the difference between speculation and evidence. When Maya finished her presentation, Dr. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photographs of the hidden signatures. "This is very serious," Dr. Morrison finally said. "If you're right, we're looking at systematic art fraud on a scale that could implicate galleries, collectors, and auction houses across the country. We need to involve law enforcement, but we also need to be absolutely certain of our facts before we make any accusations." Maya nodded, understanding the gravity of what she'd uncovered. "What do we do next?" "First, we need to find Marcus Williams. If he's alive, he's the only person who can definitively authenticate these works and explain what happened. If he's not..." Dr. Morrison paused, considering the implications. "If he's not, we'll need to find other ways to prove your theory." That evening, Maya called Denise Williams, using contact information from the 2005 missing person report. The phone rang 4 times before a woman answered, her voice cautious in the way of someone who'd learned to be suspicious of unexpected calls. "Ms. Williams, my name is Maya Chen. I'm calling about your brother Marcus. I work at the Detroit Institute of Arts, and I believe I've found some of his artwork." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Maya wondered if the call had been dropped. When Denise Williams finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Marcus has been gone for 18 years. What kind of artwork?" Maya chose her words carefully, not wanting to raise false hopes or make promises she couldn't keep. "Sketches and paintings that suggest he was a very talented artist. I think his work might have been misattributed to someone else. I was hoping we could meet and discuss what you remember about his disappearance." Another long pause. Then, "I've been waiting 18 years for someone to call me about Marcus. Can you come to my house tomorrow evening? I have things I've been saving. Things I never threw away because I always believed someone would ask the right questions eventually." Maya felt a chill of recognition. She was about to meet the sister of a man whose artistic voice had been stolen, whose family had lived with unanswered questions for nearly 2 decades. The conversation they were about to have would either validate her discoveries or reveal flaws in her reasoning that she hadn't yet considered. But as Maya hung up the phone, she felt certain that Marcus Williams's story was far from over. The sketches and hidden signatures were just the beginning. Tomorrow she would learn what it meant to lose someone not to death, but to the kind of disappearance that leaves behind only questions and the stubborn hope that someday, somehow, the truth would find its way to the surface. Denise Williams lived in the same house where she and Marcus had grown up, a modest brick colonial in Detroit's East Side that had weathered decades of neighborhood change, with the quiet dignity of structures built to last. When Maya arrived on a warm evening in late July, the porch light was already on, and she could see someone moving behind lace curtains that had probably hung in those windows since the 1980s. Denise answered the door before Maya could knock, as if she'd been watching for her arrival. At 56, she carried herself with the composed strength of someone who'd learned to hope carefully, but never stopped hoping entirely. Her resemblance to Marcus was immediately apparent in the photographs Maya had seen. The same thoughtful eyes, the same gentle expression that suggested someone who paid attention to details others might miss. "You're Maya," Denise said, not a question but a statement that carried 18 years of accumulated intuition about phone calls that might finally matter. "Come in. I've been getting ready for this conversation since yesterday." The living room felt like a shrine to interrupted life. Family photographs covered every available surface. Marcus as a child with paint-stained fingers, Marcus at high school graduation, Marcus holding his infant daughter, Marcus standing proudly next to paintings that Maya now suspected had been stolen and attributed to David Harrington. But the photographs told only part of the story. What struck Maya most was what Denise had preserved in the years since Marcus disappeared. "I kept everything," Denise explained, gesturing toward boxes stacked neatly against one wall. "Police said I should throw it away, move on, except that Marcus was probably dead. But I knew my brother. He wouldn't just leave Zara. He wouldn't abandon his art. Something happened to him, and I've been waiting for someone with the right expertise to help me figure out what. Maya spent the next 3 hours examining the contents of those boxes. Letters Marcus had written to gallery owners, photographs of paintings he'd completed, sketches for works he'd planned to create, and correspondence with art dealers who'd expressed interest in his work. Among the papers was a copy of an email from Thomas Kellerman, dated just 2 weeks before Marcus disappeared. Mr. Williams, the email read, "My clients are very interested in acquiring your entire portfolio. We should meet to discuss terms that would be mutually beneficial. I represent collectors who appreciate authentic voices in contemporary American art, and your work has exactly the kind of emotional honesty they seek. Please call me at your earliest convenience to arrange a meeting." Maya photographed the email, adding it to the growing evidence that Marcus Williams had been specifically targeted by people who understood both his artistic value and his vulnerability. The pattern was becoming clear. Identify promising artists with limited business experience, gain their trust, then steal their work in ways that would be difficult to trace or prosecute. But the most heartbreaking discovery was a small cardboard box labeled Zara's Letters in Denise's careful handwriting. Inside were dozens of letters that Marcus's daughter had written to her father over the years, addressed simply to "Daddy, wherever you are," and given to Denise to keep in case Marcus ever returned. "She's 26 now," Denise said, watching Maya read the letters with tears in her eyes. "She's a teacher in California, married to a good man who never got to meet her father. She stopped writing the letters when she turned 18, but she never stopped wondering what happened to him." Maya set the letters aside carefully, understanding that she was handling more than evidence. She was touching the accumulated grief of a family that had never been allowed to fully mourn because they'd never learned what they were mourning. "Denise," Maya said gently, "I need to ask you something important. In all the years you've been searching for Marcus, have you ever heard the name David Harrington?" Denise shook her head. "Should I have?" Maya pulled out her phone and showed Denise images of Harrington's paintings, watching her face closely for recognition. The response was immediate and devastating. "That's Marcus's work," Denise said without hesitation. "That painting of the old man reading the newspaper. Marcus showed me the sketch for that just weeks before he disappeared. He was so excited about it, said it captured something essential about dignity and endurance." She pointed to another image. "And that one with the children at the fountain. Marcus painted that from memory of a day he spent with Zara downtown. He called it one of his favorites." Maya showed her more images, and Denise identified each one with the certainty of someone who had watched her brother's creative process up close. The evidence was overwhelming. David Harrington's celebrated career was built entirely on Marcus Williams's stolen artistic vision. "There's something else you need to know," Maya said carefully. "These paintings have been selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars. The person claiming to have painted them has become famous, won awards, been featured in major museums. He's been living off your brother's talent for almost 20 years. Denise was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what Maya was telling her. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a mixture of anger and vindication that Maya found deeply moving. "I always knew Marcus was special," Denise said. "I always knew his art would touch people if they had a chance to see it. I just never imagined someone would steal his entire life's work and claim it as their own." Maya spent another hour going through the evidence with Denise, documenting everything that might help prove Marcus's authorship of the stolen paintings. But as the evening wore on, a larger question loomed. Where was Marcus Williams, and was he still alive? "I need to ask you something that might be difficult," Maya said. "Is there any chance Marcus chose to disappear? Any reason he might have walked away from his life voluntarily?" Denise's response was immediate and emphatic. Marcus would never have left Zara voluntarily. Never. He was planning to take her to the zoo the weekend he disappeared, had already bought tickets. He was going to teach her to paint that summer, had set up a little easel in his studio just for her. Whatever happened to my brother, he didn't choose it. As Maya prepared to leave, Denise asked the question that had been implicit in everything they'd discussed. "Do you think you can find him? Do you think Marcus is still alive?" Maya looked around the living room one more time, taking in the photographs and preserved memories, the evidence of a family's 18-year vigil. She thought about the hidden signatures beneath David Harrington's name, about the notebook full of artistic ideas that had been transformed into million-dollar paintings, about a little girl who had grown up writing letters to a father who might have been forced to disappear to protect her. "I don't know if he's alive," Maya said honestly, "but I know he deserves to have his name on his own work, and I know his family deserves to understand what happened to him. I'm going to do everything I can to find the truth." After Maya left, Denise sat alone in her living room, surrounded by 18 years of accumulated hope and evidence. For the first time since Marcus disappeared, she felt like the questions she'd been asking might finally have answers. The truth about her brother's fate was still unknown, but the truth about his artistic legacy was becoming undeniable. Tomorrow, Maya would take everything they'd discovered to law enforcement. The investigation that followed would determine whether Marcus Williams was still alive to reclaim his stolen legacy, or whether his family would at least finally learn what had happened to the gentle man who painted light into the shadows of ordinary days. But tonight, for the first time in 18 years, Denise Williams went to sleep believing that someone was finally asking the right questions about her brother's disappearance. The FBI's art crime team had seen many cases of stolen paintings and forged masterpieces, but the Marcus Williams investigation presented something unique: the systematic theft not just of artwork, but of an entire artistic identity. Special Agent Victoria Santos had been tracking art fraud for 12 years, and she'd never encountered a case where someone had so completely erased one artist while creating another. 3 months after Maya Chen first discovered the hidden signatures, the investigation had expanded beyond anyone's initial expectations. FBI agents working with Detroit police had uncovered evidence linking Thomas Kellerman to at least 6 other cases of missing artists, whose work had subsequently appeared under different names. The scope of the conspiracy reached into galleries, auction houses, and private collections across multiple states. But the most significant development came on a cold October morning when Agent Santos received a call from the Atlanta Police Department. A warehouse supervisor named James Morrison had contacted them after seeing news coverage of the Marcus Williams case. Morrison thought one of his employees might be the missing artist. Goes by Michael Washington. Morrison told Santos during their phone conversation, "Been working here since 2007, keeps to himself, pays cash for everything. But here's the thing, I've seen him drawing on his breaks. Quick sketches on whatever paper he can find. The style looks exactly like those paintings you showed on the news." Santos was on a plane to Atlanta that afternoon. Marcus Williams had aged 18 years in ways that went beyond the inevitable changes of time. At 52, his hair was completely gray, and his hands bore the calluses of warehouse work rather than the paint stains of artistic creation. When Santos showed him photographs of the paintings attributed to David Harrington, Marcus's reaction was immediate and devastating. "Those are mine," he said quietly, staring at images of work he'd created in a Detroit studio that felt like a lifetime ago. Every one of them. The story Marcus told over the following hours was one of calculated cruelty disguised as business opportunity. Thomas Kellerman had approached him in the summer of 2005, promising gallery representation and financial security. The meeting that was supposed to change Marcus's life had instead destroyed it. When Kellerman's associates made clear that Marcus had a choice: disappear voluntarily or risk harm coming to his 8-year-old daughter. "They knew everything about Zara," Marcus explained, his voice steady but his hands shaking slightly. "Her school schedule, her mother's work routine, where she played soccer on weekends. They said if I ever tried to contact my family or reclaim my artwork, they'd hurt her. They said they'd be watching, and I believed them." Marcus had spent 18 years living as a ghost, working menial jobs and sending anonymous money orders to help with Zara's expenses when he could afford it. He'd never painted again, never contacted his family, never tried to rebuild the life that had been stolen from him. The sacrifice of his artistic identity had been the price of his daughter's safety. "Every day I wondered if she was okay," Marcus said. "Every day I wanted to call, to write, to somehow let Denise know I was alive. But I couldn't risk it. I couldn't take the chance that they might hurt Zara because of my selfishness." Agent Santos had to deliver news that was both wonderful and terrible. Zara was safe, successful, and completely unaware that her father had sacrificed everything to protect her. She was also about to learn that the father she'd believed had abandoned her had actually loved her enough to disappear. The reunion between Marcus and his family was arranged carefully, with FBI protection and psychological support. Denise's reaction to seeing her brother alive was everything Maya had hoped for, Tears, embraces, and the kind of relief that comes from 18 years of questions finally receiving answers. But it was Marcus's first conversation with Zara that truly captured the emotional magnitude of what had been lost and found. Now 26, and an elementary school teacher in Sacramento, Zara had grown up believing her father had simply walked away from his responsibilities. Learning that he'd actually sacrificed his entire life to protect her required a fundamental rewriting of her personal history. "I used to dream about confronting you," Zara told her father during their first phone call, her voice a mixture of anger and wonder. "I used to imagine what I'd say if I ever saw you again. But I never imagined anything like this." The conversation lasted 3 hours, with Marcus trying to explain 18 years of silence, and Zara trying to understand how the story of her childhood had been completely different from what she'd believed. They made plans to meet in person, to begin the slow process of rebuilding a relationship that had been frozen in time when she was 8 years old. Meanwhile, the legal consequences for David Harrington and his associates were mounting. Federal charges included art fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Harrington's entire catalog was being re-examined, with experts determining which works were original Marcus Williams paintings and which were Harrington's attempts to continue the stolen style. Victoria Whitmore, the gallery owner who had helped build Harrington's reputation, cooperated fully with investigators once she understood the scope of the deception. She'd been manipulated as much as anyone, trusting documentation that had been carefully fabricated to support Harrington's false identity. "I pride myself on representing authentic voices," Whitmore said during her FBI interview. "To learn that I've been complicit in silencing one of those voices is the worst kind of professional betrayal." The art world's response was swift and decisive. Galleries removed Harrington's work from their walls. Collectors demanded refunds. Museums began the complex process of reattributing stolen works to their rightful creator. The financial losses were estimated in the millions, but the cultural damage was harder to quantify. Maya Chen found herself at the center of a story that had expanded far beyond her original discovery. She'd started the summer as a graduate student looking for internship experience, and ended it as the person who'd uncovered one of the art world's most audacious thefts. But the recognition felt secondary to the knowledge that she'd helped reunite a family and restore an artist's stolen legacy. The most poignant moment came when Marcus finally returned to Detroit and visited the Detroit Institute of Arts, where his paintings now hung with proper attribution. Standing in front of Sunday Morning Brush Park, he touched the frame gently and smiled for the first time in 18 years. "I thought I'd never see them again," he said to Maya, who had arranged the private viewing. "I thought they were lost forever, like everything else." Maya watched Marcus examine his own work as if seeing it for the first time, noting details he'd forgotten and remembering the emotions that had inspired each brushstroke. The paintings had survived their theft and misattribution, but their creator had survived something much more difficult, the complete erasure of his identity and the forced abandonment of everyone he loved. "What will you do now?" Maya asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering a question he'd never allowed himself to contemplate during his years of exile. "I want to paint again," he said finally. "I want to teach Zara about art, if she's interested. I want to know my son-in-law and maybe meet my grandchildren someday. I want to have a life that's actually mine." He paused, looking around the gallery where his work was finally displayed under his own name. "But mostly, I want to paint pictures of hope. I've spent 18 years painting in my mind, imagining canvases I couldn't create. Now I have the chance to make them real." 6 months later, Marcus Williams held his first exhibition in nearly 2 decades. The show, titled Letters Never Sent, featured new paintings inspired by the imaginary artwork he'd created during his years of exile. The opening was attended by family, friends, art collectors, and journalists who wanted to witness the artistic resurrection of a man who'd been presumed dead. Zara flew in from California for the opening, bringing her husband and their 2-year-old daughter, Marcus's granddaughter, who would grow up knowing her grandfather as the artist he'd always been meant to be. If stories like Sarah's move you to believe in the power of hope and the strength of human connection, we share them because they remind us that even in our darkest moments, the melodies of love continue to play, waiting to guide us home. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to hear more stories that touch the soul and inspire the heart.